Welcome to episode number 319 of the Comic Watchers Show. He's Chad, I'm Matt. This is our show where we watch comics and frequently talk to people that make them. So, in that spirit, returning to the show this week, we have the one, the only David Pepose coming back to talk to us about a great many things. We've got his Kickstarter, the OZ. We might get into Space Coast. We might get into Speed Racer. The floor is his. So, David, how the heck are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited. You know, the OZ is a book that is near and dear to my heart. It's Mad Max meets the Wizard of Oz. This book has been a long time coming. It's been 5 years since our last campaign. We've been working steadily on our third and final issue since the last campaign wrapped. And finally, we've got all the art together. This book is 100% fully drawn, colored, and lettered. So we are excited to bring you back to Oz have a reunite with our Yellow Brick Road warriors.
Heck yeah.
I was just going to say, back in 2020 for the first issue, I was still, before I was doing these interviews, somehow I wormed my way onto this show, but
I feel the same way.
But we talked about the OZ, you and I back in 2020. So
it's this book has been it's a real trip to work on this book because it's something that dates back to the early days of my career. The OZ, my very first book was a book called Spencer and Locke. The pitch was, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? And making that book was such a fun experience, but it was also like the hardest thing I've ever done. And I remember thinking, let's see how this book does, because if people hate this book, I'm not doing this again. And so like once the dust settled and I kind of opened up my eyes and I was like, they don't hate me. They like this book. I finally that was the moment that gave me permission to be like, okay, maybe this wasn't a one-off thing. Maybe I can do this again. And so I wrote down 3 ideas in the aftermath of that. Beyond working on Spencer and Locke 2. I wrote down an idea for going to the chapel. I wrote down an idea for sort of my long gestating sci-fi book that we need to find an artist and a publisher on, Grand Theft Astro, and the OZ. And so like this thing's been in the works for a long time, but now coming back to it, as a more seasoned creator, this is a book that I wrote concurrently with Scout's Honor, just to give you a sense of timing. That book came out the day of the insurrection in 2021. And so, I finished writing this, I guess it was like early days of COVID. But what's in the industry is called a lettering pass. You get the artwork in, and then you kind of look back at your script and you're like, does what I've written still match the action here? Do I need to change my dialogue? And so that became like an interesting exercise in that, now I have this art for the story that I wrote years ago, but I have more experience now. And so how do I sort of refine my approach to all of this in a way that still makes the other issues feel consistent? So that sort of, was a real trip. But yeah, I think the OZ kind of draws back to that early sense of mashups and subversion that I love doing in all of my books. For those who don't know what it is, it's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who's an Iraq war veteran who's grappling with disillusionment and PTSD. One night, a tornado hits their Kansas farm, and she finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz, where our new Dorothy learns that Grandma killing 2 wicked witches in a week and then splitting, that's not a happy ending. That's a power vacuum, not unlike Baghdad. And so our new Dorothy basically has to team up with her grandma's former friends, the Tin Soldier, the Prince of Lions, and Jack Pumpkinhead, in order to bring peace to the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. So it's sort of my big kind of twisted riff on fantasy. And it's like I said, it's been a long time coming. Our third and final issue that sort of wraps up the series. But I think when people read it and they read issues 1 and 2, which you can also get on the Kickstarter if you missed any of our previous campaigns, they're going to see that this was definitely worth the wait.
So this is three. So just to clarify, this is three individual issues. It's not a trade. It's three comics.
Three individual issues. We what we wanted to do for Kickstarter is, it's we're not backed by a publisher. We're not owned by a company. I self-financed this book. And so we really wanted to make sure that Kickstarter backers were incentivized to actually back the campaign, that we weren't trying to go for sort of a wait for the trade mentality. And so, we really wanted to kind of double down on this idea of single issues. And so, our first campaign was issue 1 and then the second campaign was issue 2. This is our campaign for issue 3. The interesting thing about this campaign that I didn't have in the earlier ones is I feel like I've had a whole ass career since the last campaign. I had just been tapped at Marvel as I was running that second campaign, so nobody knew that Savage Avengers was coming out yet. And so I've been really fortunate that I've had a lot more eyes to my work in the intervening 5 years. And so I wanted to make sure that this campaign was friendly for those people as well. So we have catch-up tiers, both in print and digital. So you can get all 3 issues of the OZ in one shot. But also, we have all of my individual trades from my other series as add-ons. So that way, if you're interested in Space Ghost and you can't get volume 1 because it's out of print, you can get it from me. Or if you're interested in my Marvel work, or if you want Spencer and Locke, which is also out of print, I've got it. And then we've also got kind of bundles at discount. So if you want to get all 5 of my Marvel trades, we've got a tier for that. If you want to get all 5 of my creator-owned books, we've got a tier for that. If you want all 5 of my licensed books, that's both volumes of Space Ghost, both volumes of Speed Racer, and Captain Planet, we got that ready for you too. Or if you want it all, I will happily sell that to you. We're really lucky. We are working with the amazing team at Laguna Studios for fulfillment on this, which I'm sure is a question that if nobody was asking, they should have been asking, which is, how is the guy writing 4 books and has a baby on the way? How is he going to package with all my Kickstarters? The answer is, I'm not doing that. We have professionals working on that. We have already priced that into our shipping, so you're not going to have to pay extra on all that. You're paying exactly what you would have been paying if it was just me doing it myself. But yeah, this campaign has all been about how do we build it so nobody has to wait, so that everything is as frictionless as it can be, that the only thing you have to do is give me your shipping address. And so we have really built this campaign out in that way that I'm not the bottleneck on anything. And also, we wanted to wait until the book was done, 100% done. I can tell you, I looked at the final lettering this morning. It is finished. It took a little while for us to get there, and I want to kind of make that clear to our readers as to sort of why that was, because I think it'd be very easy for people to think, oh, he worked in Marvel, and so he forgot us, and that is not, I promise, not the case. We've been hard at work on the OZ literally since the last campaign. And what happened is, I think it's easy to forget, especially because I work primarily in monthly comics, that, when you're working, especially in the self-published indie scene, especially on Kickstarter, it's easy to forget that sometimes, these are human beings with human lives that are making these books.
Yeah.
And life basically just kind of hit our artist, Ruben Rojas. He got married, he had a kid, he was in Spain during the worst of COVID, where things were bad, and both in terms of the economy and just everything going on. I believe there was something with either one of his parents or his spouse's parents. There was a lot kind of going on top of Ruben just having a day job and raising a child. And so, we had a conversation kind of early on about it, where it was, I did not want, first off, Ruben is the heart and soul of the book. He is a sensationally tremendous artist, and I would not have felt right not continuing with him. I've been lucky in my career. I've only had one fill-in artist, and that fill-in artist did an amazing job under an extremely punishing deadline. But every time I look at that book, I'm like, that this chapter doesn't match. I did not want that to happen for the OZ. Our backers pay artisanal prices for an artisanal product. I am going to make sure that this thing is consistent. And so I eventually just kind of told Ruben, turn in the pages when you can. And so he really Shawshanked his way through this third issue. It was bit by bit, piece by piece. We were checking in kind of every other week until it was finished. And so we finished the inks on OZ. I want to say it was in the fall. And then Whitney Kogar got to work on our colors, which kind of wrapped up at the end of the year. And then I finished our lettering pass like 6 weeks after that, in between my other deadlines. And then Dave Hopkins has sort of been working on all that. There have been certain real world things we've had to dodge, the Kickstarter strikes for sure. We didn't really want to do anything, when everything was going on in Venezuela. And also just trying to kind of make sure that there weren't any other big announcements coming from any of my other publishers. Not because like I needed to do anything for it, but because I didn't want any of my other books to cannibalize spotlight from this book.
Yeah, you don't want anything overshadowed.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to make sure that I had a runway that I could commit to pushing this book 110%. And so this kind of was the best window for it. We just only recently got all the final letters in. So I know it's taken a long time, and our readers have been so amazingly passionate and patient with us. But ultimately, my thinking all came down to how can we deliver you the best possible book? That when you read this thing from beginning to end, you know that this came out exactly as we intended it. It is one cohesive story from beginning to end with the same creative team. So I know it's taken a bit, but I got to tell you, Ruben's pages are so sensational, and Whitney Kogar is like the best colorist for his work. You're gonna see it, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, that's why it took a few years." It's really breathtaking stuff.
Now you've clearly been keeping busy in the interim since between issues 2 and 3. So and I know you said your artist Ruben had life stuff going on, but did your orbit that you've been pulled into, did it detract from you like mentally from issue 3? Has issue 3 been written for years now?
Yeah, exactly. That you nailed it in one. So I wrote the OZ. I started it in 2019, I think. It may have even been end of 2018. I finished the back half of that book. I wrote it concurrently with Scout's Honor. So that was being written in 2020. So basically I had a couple of months where literally I'd write a script of Scout's Honor, and then I'd write a script of OZ, and then I'd write a script of 10-Ton Titan Terrier. And that was sort of how I got through the opening days of COVID. That's sort of where I burned all that kind of nervous energy and feelings of powerlessness. So the story had been done, for years. However, like I said, doing the lettering pass and looking back on it, you see there was more than one way to skin a cat. And so that was a really kind of out of body experience, looking back on like, something I've really worked on a lot in the last few years is how do I say as much as I've been saying, but say less of it, like how do I kind of keep trimming things down and make the books still feel satisfying, but like make sure they move, that there's less fat on them. And so getting to look back at this double-sized last issue and being able to say like, oh, okay, like how can I say this thing that I said in 3 lines? Can I say it in 1? And now that I'm more experienced, I can. But at the same time, there have been certainly, you see the state of the world, and I do feel like the OZ, you can't escape sort of where we're at right now, particularly in terms of, the state of the world today, but also sort of military adventurism that our country is going through right now. It kind of, all these years later, it's sort of the light bulb only went off in an interview I did like earlier this week. The OZ, when you really boil it down, both as a concept but also in the themes, is the idea of home being a place that you can't go back to anymore. Because really what home is, it's the past and it's the memories you've built, which never really match the reality today.
Sure.
And I think that speaks to the national sense of mourning that we're all in today. That I think we all had an idea of what this country was. We have memories of what this country was when it was in a better place, and now the past is a place we can't go back to. That's the same thing with soldiers coming back from overseas, where they're reintegrating back into a civilian life that where they left was perfectly natural for them, and now is so alien and different from the sort of regimented stuff that they saw overseas, that it is a learning curve. And then down to the Land of Oz, where we have this idea in our minds, the cultural zeitgeist of the Warner Brothers film, and then seeing that no, if you just even like added up the math of the story of Dorothy killing two wicked witches, exposing the Wizard of Oz, and then abruptly leaving, that's not a happy ending. And this place of Technicolor magic has sort of turned into this like war zone. I think that all kind of speaks to these common threads throughout the and what can we do to navigate this world? What can we do to navigate the pain and the scars and the trauma of this dissonance between the past we can't escape and the future we can't quite seem to reach?
Right.
So, yeah, it's a book that, especially working on something this long, it is kind of surprising when you see themes. Sometimes they continue to resonate, and sometimes they mutate a little bit in the context of when they come out. But I do think it speaks to the OZ, both in the strength of the concept, but also in kind of the angle that we've chosen for it, that the concept still has legs, and it still feels, I think, just as resonant as it did when the first campaign came out back in 2020.
Right. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How much research of other volumes from the Land of Oz, the Wonderful World of Oz, did you do for the OZ, or did you kind of just stick more with the familiar from the movie?
Well, so that's a great question, because the movie is actually its own separate animal, legally speaking. So while the Wizard of Oz, the L. Frank Baum novels, they are considered public domain. You cannot do stuff. You can't do stuff from the movie that's considered Warner Brothers property. And so that's the big reason, like, we have the silver slippers. And I know we've had people ask in the past, like, why not the ruby slippers? You cannot do the ruby slippers. That was an invention for the movie to kind of play up that Technicolor. It's funny. I read a bunch of the Oz books in college for an English class on adolescent literature. And I was doing it was a comparison between the Land of Oz and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so the Narnia books. And so, the thing is about Oz is whether or not you include the movie, although I do think the movie, of course, is seminal and a big reason why it is endured in the cultural zeitgeist. But also, it's something that there's something just elemental about the imagery of all that, of the iconography. It's something that kind of has really stuck in our cultural DNA. That you see the core characters of Dorothy and Scarecrow and Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion, and that's almost like Carl Jung at that point. These characters are such strong archetypes, and I think that that's the sort of thing that invites a lot of reinterpretation, invites a lot of different riffs on things like that. Now, granted, I wanted to make sure that we stayed, knowing that a huge portion of the audience only knows it from the movie. I did want to make sure we didn't veer too far away from I consider like the baseline mythology, but we did draw from it. I mean, like Jack Pumpkinhead is kind of like the big one from all of that. If you're a fan of Return to Oz, you'll know that character. But we definitely did try to fit in kind of like little bits and pieces of Easter eggs. But there are certain things that I kind of left on the table just in case we ever returned to the OZ. Ozma, for example, is a character that if she ever showed up, I think would be a ticking time bomb for the company. And so never say never in that regard. But yeah, it's one of those things. it was fun kind of drawing from not just the novels and not just from what I remember of the movie, but also just kind of seeing what else was out there. There's a lot of different reinterpretations of the Wizard of Oz. Return to Oz, tonally, honestly, there's a lot of DNA shared in that one. And that's a movie when I was a kid. I don't know if I made it 20 minutes. I was so freaked out. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing to be a part of this kind of mythology in a small way. And I will tell you, Oz as a fandom is as a big tent that continues to surprise me. You hear my voice is very scratchy. I just came back from Fan Expo Denver. I was there yesterday, and I had some copies of the OZ, some spare copies from my stock. I wanted to make sure that we were really beating the drum ahead of this Kickstarter. It's amazing how many people who weren't even interested in Marvel or DC didn't care about Space Ghost or Speed Racer. They were like, they've looked to one look at that tin soldier and they're like, what is this? Oz? What is this? It is a world that has still has a deep grip on, I think, the popular imagination.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a fun world to get to play with and to get to kind of reinterpret in our own way.
Well, David, you've obviously sat through too many of my interviews because in 20 minutes you just answered all my questions.
My bad.
Well, it's on my shoulders now.
No. I'll try to spin it this way. With the Oz being something that a lot of indie creators use, do you think it risks becoming kind of diluted, or is it?
No, and the reason I would say that no is first off, every time I see anything Oz related, it's always super popular, and even the OZ is super popular. I've literally had 2 publishers offer us predatory deals on it, and then come up with their own ripoff versions. So read between the lines on that one. But I think, like I said, like the iconography is so enduring, but I think also it's subversion is written into the text. I mean, there's a reason why it's called The Wizard of Oz. Like, you think of the movie as the sort of squeaky clean, very wholesome adventure, but like the literal title character is a flim flam man. He's it's all scam. He's the big green face, but it's really the guy behind the curtain. And so I think people who like it, the Wizard of Oz, they know to look for a little bit of subversion. There is that's little bit of subversion binds all the wholesome elements together, because you don't know when the rug's going to get pulled. And so you see interpretations like Wicked, for example, which is on that in December. I hope somebody is enterprising enough to do a Wicked OZ party. I think it's so elastic, and people do like seeing subversions of that stuff. Now, granted, I don't think they like seeing stuff that's kind of twisted and gritty for the sake of being twisted and gritty. I don't think anybody cares about like the horror Steamboat Willie movie or the horror Popeye movies. Although if they're great, I'm more than willing to be corrected. I think you do need to be able to justify it within the text. It can't just be shocking for shock value's sake. That's sort of been a big belief of mine from the beginning. But I think if you can find a way to sort of twist the story and the math still adds up, people are always very interested. Nobody turns away from a motorcycle stunt jump. They always want to see if you can stick the landing. And I feel very confident in us doing that, based on the strength of our team and the strength of our story and the strength of the source materials that we're drawing from. This is a book that I think, no pun intended, I think is going to be evergreen for a long time. I think this is a book that, like Spencer and Locke and The Devil Wears My Face, I always measure it. Can I sell it on the con table? This is a book that's going to sell on the con table forever.
So since you said you've had the story written for a few years now, and going back and looking at it after you've written Savage Avengers and The Punisher, and you said that there are things that you would trying to do better. Are you tempted to go back and make those changes, or you just gonna?
No. I certainly I don't plan on George Lucasing the first two issues. I feel very good about those two issues. I think they stand on their own. I having read all of it sort of from beginning to end, I don't think there's anything I'd change. It's definitely, yeah, and also like I want to make sure like I honor that the creator I was when I came out with the book. Like I still think it holds up, and that was sort of a fun and interesting challenge. Was what are the ways that I can sort of subtly punch it up in the finale, but in a way that it still still reads as one cohesive story. So like I will say it's not like it was like major surgery by any means. It was really just like finding ways, you know, cutting things, killing your darlings a little bit, but also like finding ways to be like, how do I keep some of these darlings, So yeah, I think I think there's only one line I think in the entire history that I've written, and I'm not going to share what it is. There's only one line that in any of my books that I always look back and I'm like, ugh, that if we ever redid it, I would change it, but it's not in the OZ. That's definitely like I don't know. I always look at that book. I think having looked at it now and seen the whole thing finally, the reaction feels very different from what I had expected. I think usually when I finish a book, it's just that sense of relief. It's that sort of like you've crossed the finish line and now it's time to fall over. That wasn't the case for this. This book, it almost felt like I was kind of looking at my younger self. I was looking at myself from almost 10 years ago when I started it. And all I could do was kind of look back on that kid with a sense of compassion that I was like this young, scrappy creator who had no idea what my future was going to hold, had no idea if I had a future in this business, wasn't even sure what the hell I was doing. But I put my nose to grindstone every day and I was just writing. And hoping that it turned out. And I look back on it and that's a part of getting older, and that's a part of having experiences. You do lose a little bit of that fly by the seat of your pants by pure passion and enthusiasm. That's a young man's game. Now as I'm a little older, and when I say a little older, I only say I'm 40. I do tackle things a little bit more methodically. I try to think things through. I'm thinking of things less of can I get it made, and now it's just like what is this going to do sort of in the aggregate? Is this something that is going to be worth taking the time and energy and investment that I could be doing on another project? But yeah, this book, I look back on it and I feel the only thing I just feel affection.
I would say fulfillment would probably be a fitting term as well. Just based on what you're telling us.
Yeah, it's this book more than most has been a leap of faith from the very beginning. I self-published it. I developed it for a publisher who we went to the 1 yard line, and it was between us and another fantasy book, and by much more experienced creators. And so I don't blame the publisher for not picking us up. And if anything, the editor did me an incredible solid that no editor has ever done before or since. He said, "Don't give up on this." He said, "It's really good. Like I'm sorry that we couldn't get it through, but it's really good and don't give up on it." And that encouragement I found and hired Ruben Rojas the next week. This book, we won a Ringo Award from this. I was able to pay for my baby's IVF. I got my dog in the aftermath of this campaign. This book really changed my life in a lot of ways. It really empowered me as a creator because it taught me I don't have to wait for permission to tell a story, that we can kind of get it through based on sheer grit and will, and the readers will come. and they will support us. As if we can deliver the goods, they will be there to catch us. And so that's why this book is so important, why it's so special to me. It's why we've been working on it. I know it's been slow, but not a week has gone by that we have not been doing something related to the OZ for 5 straight years. It's taken a long time to get here. And in that regard, I do feel that sense of relief that the work that work is over, and now we get to just have the fun of promoting it.
Yeah, as you should.
Now looking back on what you wrote 5 years ago, 6 years ago, do you see any seeds that maybe were planted that have developed as you've written your mainstream stuff?
That's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. Well, it's interesting because I think there's certain trends to characters that, like, Dorothy was kind of an early, I think I do love writing kind of like brooding characters with a past that, like, can they kind of like transcend that past? And, that started with Spencer and Locke. And I think Dorothy was kind of the next successor to that spiritually. The OZ certainly shares a lot of DNA and spirit with the original Spencer and Locke. And you see it even in like my Moon Knight run, with my miniseries City of the Dead, that you see a lot of that with Mark Spector. Space Ghost for sure. So yeah, I mean, even the team on Savage Avengers all collectively were people who hated themselves for the blood on their hands and sort of this kind of kinship in each other. So there's certainly, I do very detailed outlines of my books. Sometimes my editors want to kill me when they see how long my outlines are, but it's literally, so there's no guesswork. You know exactly what's going to happen in every stage of the book, down to a page-to-page basis. And so as a result, it also keeps the stories very locked in and fresh over the long haul. So that if I have a concept and it takes a few years to come together, I have a creator-owned book that I'm actually about to just get started on that I developed that back in 2020, and we only just recently got a publisher on it. And it was nice to be able to basically crack that thing open. And there were certain things that, like, just by virtue of more experience, I was able to kind of, I can fix this a little bit. And then there were a few sort of modern things, like things that had happened in the real world that I was able to kind of inject in there but 95% of the stories still remained intact. And so that's really kind of nice that, like, I build full blueprints, because that way I can save them for a rainy day. And if I don't have anything, or, you never know when somebody's going to be interested in something like
right.
this. Or you never know when just like you find the right artist and you're like, hey, are you working on anything right now? Like, could I hire you to start working on this thing kind of behind the scenes, and we'll do another Kickstarter? Like, I love the Kickstarter community because of how supportive they are. And I know it's been a minute since the last time I did this. I didn't want to launch a different book before we finished OZ, but I would love to make this a more regular habit. But
He'll be back.
He'll be back. Chad vanished. He disappeared. He's behind the curtain now.
That's right.
But yeah, it's definitely, there are certain trends I think that certainly emerge, and I think there are certain characters that I gravitate towards. But it is, kind of interesting that, like, as I'm older and hopefully a little wiser and hopefully have my act together a little bit better, I there are characters that I look back on and I'm just like, oh man, like, I know where I was at in my life and in my headspace when I wrote this book.
Sure. Well, I mean, certain characters that you write are simply going to speak to whatever phase you were at in your life.
Exactly.
You're fixing to, if I may, you're fixing to become a father. And again, congratulations. Like, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, congrats.
That's going to affect your writing.
You will see it a bit in Space Ghost. You're tricky. That was a good segue into that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Space Ghost, you see that quite a bit. As we're wrapping up our second volume,
Yeah.
it's going to be in our annual that's up for pre-orders right now. Tell your local comic shop you want it. Space Ghost annual coming out in July. That's sort of the capstone to year 2. Um, Space Ghost, that has always been a found family story. It's how Space Ghost is a cosmic vigilante, finds these 2 orphans, orphan twins, Jan and Jace, their pet monkey Cliff, and takes them in, and then eventually, they become his sidekicks, and then eventually his trusted partners, and then eventually sort of his surrogate found family. It's this widower and 2 orphans, and it's funny because when I started writing that book, I really gravitated towards it, and I had no idea. I like everything was just clicking. I understood these characters immediately, even beyond the Dr. Grant and Tim and Lex kind of dynamic from Jurassic Park. And it wasn't until issue 4 that I realized. It's a little bit of trivia about me that a lot of people don't know. I am the older brother of triplets. My younger siblings are 9 years younger than me today. When they were born, I felt like the dinosaur watching the meteor.
Sure.
And I realized around issue 4 of Space Ghost, that's what I was really writing about, is that it was the day I started counting everything in threes. And that when I was an only child, I had a system. And I was used to that system. I was used to that routine. And then these 3 kids just blew it up. And suddenly, not only are you sort of trying to scramble and figure out what the new normal is, but you've got these 3 kind of effervescent kids running around on jetpacks, and they're gonna have an impact on you too, in terms of Space Ghost being this guy who's pushed his humanity down after the deaths of his family. Well, you can't do that when you have these twins. They're gonna bring that humanity out of you, whether you like it or not. And so, getting into sort of the end of volume 2. My wife and I did IVF, and so that was a long time coming. My wife's a champion, but you can see towards the tail end, particularly with issues 11 and 12, that I was writing sort of in the early days of all this. You can see I look at him that is definitely a guy who's having kids, and by the time our big Space Ghost event kicks off in September, you'll be like, oh, that was definitely written by a guy whose wife is a dinosaur, and so, yeah, I think Space Ghost, we've got some really fun stuff coming in that one. We've got our big finale for the Tempest the Time Master storyline next week, and without spoiling too much, it's a big blockbuster storyline that was originally going to be the end of the run, and 2 things kind of happened to change that. In that, first, Dynamite had sort of we were talking back and forth about a Space Ghost event, and they had said, do you have any ideas about trying to mash up Captain Planet with that? And I said, I'm going to think on that. I still haven't really come up with a good answer yet, but it's you know what? There's one other property that you have the license to that I think would be a really good fit. So as I was working on that, I was about to start writing issue 12 of the run, and Joe Ryvant messages me 48 hours before I'm supposed to start writing issue 12, not even, and he goes, "Listen, volume 1 was 12 issues or 13 issues. Volume 2 went from 5 issues to 8 to 10 to 12. We just kept extending it every few months." And he goes, "Listen, we've already done 12 issues. You got to do a 13th. We got to make this thing happen." And at the moment, I sort of went to my office and I pulled my hair and I screamed a little bit. But then I realized, no, Joe did me a favor. You never turned down more runway. And I realized I could have my cake and eat it too, that I could have this big blockbuster 28-page finale for issue 12 of the Tempest storyline. But then I could kind of take that emotional fallout from it, and rather than speed run through it in my initial plans, I could really just make a meal out of it with this finale. And so Space Ghost Annual is kind of it's a bookend to year 2. And it's sort of a conversation piece with our first issue of season 2, which was a conversation. It was that issue was Jan and Jace meeting their grandfather for the first time. Dr. Henry Contra, who he became our villain, the Antimatter Man. They're sort of our Harvey Dent or Jekyll and Hyde. That issue was about why does the universe need a Space Ghost, and more importantly, why is the man behind the mask so important to Janet Chase? And we had a Space Ghost adventure kind of intercut between all this, where he's fighting the toy maker, where he's kind of going through it, thinking like, what's my life going to look like if I don't have these kids? Space Ghost Annual is sort of our return to that. It's the bookend. It's Space Ghost has walked a fine line between being a superhero and a surrogate father, and meeting Tempest is going to come at a cost. And so he's going to have to be thinking long and hard about, like, can I keep this up? Like, does the universe need a Space Ghost? Do these kids need me? And so he's going to have a conversation with a really interesting counterpart. And meanwhile, we're going to see a fun adventure between Space Ghost and the twins. They are dealing with a thief by the name of Magnus, who's kind of like the Dr. Octopus, or maybe the Stiltman of the Space Ghost universe. He's got a suit of armor with telescoping arms and legs. And he's got a partner, this sort of mysterious reality warping being known only as the alien. And so Magnus and the alien have stolen a piece of technology that's particularly volatile. And if it's not taken care of very carefully, it could blow up half the city. And so Space Ghost and the twins are trying to stop him. And they find out there's a secret behind all this. That, like, Magnus, there's more to him than meets the eye. And that is going to bring this sort of crisis of faith to a head for Space Ghost. So he's going to have to really think long and hard about his future and sort of where does he fit in these kids' lives. Right. However, amidst all this fun action and character work and emotion, the annual is also really important because it tees off our big Space Ghost event kicking off in September. We're bringing in Alex Toth's other iconic sci-fi adventuring team, the Herculoids, into the fold. We're building up Space Ghost universe in a big way. And so, we're kicking that off with our big 5-part summer event, our fall event, kicking off in September, going through September, October, through the end of the year. It's going to be so fun. For those who aren't familiar with what the Herculoids are, it's the story excuse me, of the space barbarian Xandor, his fearsome wife Tara, their young acrobatic son Dorno, and the 5 interstellar kaiju that they hang out with, known as the Herculoids. So they have Zoc, the star dragon, Igu, the mighty rock ape, Tundro, the living tank, and a pair of green protoplasm named Gloop and Gleep, the formless, fearless wonders. And they basically, it's like if Conan lived in space and hung out with kaiju and had a family and fought like interstellar pirates and industrialists and raiders who were looking to pillage and exploit their ecosystem. They're a fun cast of characters. And I love the idea of a Space Ghost as a found family story. What happens when they meet like a fully formed family from the other side of the cosmic tracks, who do think they are strange and they do things very, very differently, but they got the muscle to back it up. And so it's really kind of a little bit of a Batman, Superman kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Space Ghost is very much about injecting all sorts of pop culture DNA into our stories, but also hitting the fun superhero trope. It's been a long time since I've been able to do the superhero team up, and I've had so much fun exploring Space Ghost universe that this felt like the perfect way to kind of give this series even more runway to play with, because now we can cross-pollinate with all the Herculoids iconography as well. It's fun, Space Ghost, for anyone who's read our run, he's our grouchy little boy. He's oops all fists. I think he does take a little bit of pride in knowing that he's the scariest, toughest guy in any room, except that Xandor, the space barbarian, he ain't from around here, and he's not buying what Space Ghost is selling. And so it's kind of nice, this idea of like this, sort of injecting the science superhero with science fantasy, and really kind of being able to have the best of all worlds in an adventure that is a 5-part adventure. It's our first experiment with longer form storytelling, but we wanted to make sure we introduced the Herculoids in the biggest, most blockbuster way possible and show that they can go toe-to-toe with the Space Ghost and Company.
Now, is this going to be Tom Signatsky's?
Herculoids, yes. This fits in. I wanted to make sure that this fit in within the universe that Tom had established. And so the way we've kind of done it is we took the 10 issues that he wrote, and then we sort of I watched all the original cartoons to basically say, like, what kind of backstory and scaffolding can we add to this? And so I think we've hit a really nice synthesis. There are certain plot threads from Tom's run that I didn't want to mess with, just because I was like, if he ever comes back to the book, I want to make sure that those plot threads are still there for him to pick up. However, Tom really, like, he left us a lot that we could work with. There were so many episodes that hadn't been used yet in that run that we're able to draw bits and pieces from. A really important episode, for example, that gets kind of overlooked and became kind of the touchstone of my understanding of the Herculoids as a team is an episode called The Gladiators of Kyanite. And that really kind of formed my new backstory for Xandor, which is that he was picked up as a boy sort of in the aftermath of Tom's origin story for them. He was picked up by the legionnaires of Emperor Heron and forced to fight in the arena as a gladiator of Kyanite. And so that is sort of what explains how Xandor has become this tough guy who is so skilled in the art of war. He spent years fighting for his life in the pits next to Tundro. And that's how he met Luke for the first time. He was the Emperor's beast, enslaved beast, trying to kill them until Tara rescues them. She raised by the Rock Village, by the village elder Corsac. So she's basically the mayor's daughter who became a revolutionary who says Amzot's a free world and we're all supposed to be free in it. And I think that speaks to the core difference between Space Ghost and Hercules, which is Space Ghost defends the defenseless. He doesn't kill. He is a superhero. That's not really what the Herculoids are about. The Herculoids are about fighting to protect people's freedom from enslavement and exploitation. So it's a little different, but it's a subtle but very meaningful difference. The Herculoids are very much like, killing's not going to be our first thing to go to, but like we're not going to lose sleep if that has to happen. They're sort of almost the nuclear deterrent on the planet Amazon, where any warring countries, they better weigh their options and decide if it's worth risking. If they want to invade their neighbors, what happens if Xandor and the Herculoids show up? And so that's an interesting dichotomy between the two of them. Space Ghost, even though he operates outside the law as a vigilante, he still defends the Galactic Federation. He still believes in law as a concept, even if he recognizes there are many corrupt forces within it.
Right.
He's still ultimately a defender of the status quo. Whereas the Herculoids are firmly anti-establishment. The establishment has done nothing but try to invade and pillage their world. Every time they've dealt with an outsider, it is usually bad news. And what it all stems down to a unique element that is only on Amazon. It's the mineral called quasarite. And this is sort of our way of building up on the classic Herculoids concept of the energy rocks, which were usually used in like slingshots as sort of explosive materials for the Herculoids. But in an episode called The Purple Menace, we found that it also could affect the local ecosystem. And so I kind of built all of Amzot's mythology a little bit around that quasarite not only sort of affects the ecosystem and is the reason why there's so many strange beasts on the planet Amzot, but also Xandor and Tara and Dorno and the Herculoids, by their own unique physiology that's explained in Tom's run, they've spent their entire lives metabolizing quasarite from the atmosphere. So that's made them, it's given them enhanced speed and strength and durability that lets them stand toe-to-toe with somebody like Space Ghost, but also has sort of, that was not going to go undiscovered forever. And that is sort of going to put a target on Amzot's back, which means that Xandor and company are not going to take that line down. And so that's sort of when you meet Space Ghost, and that's when Space Ghost and Xandor meet for the first time, is this second chance that his wife and son have given him, this new life that is sort of papered over this deep well of trauma and pain that he honestly has in common with Space Ghost. Something has made Xandor badly. And so that's sort of going to cause a little bit of friction between these two guys when they first meet. And it's going to take them a minute before they kind of put their differences aside and realize what their kind of core commonality is. And this is the thing that kind of stems from my own life is there are two fathers who love their children and will do anything to protect their children. And I think that's a very universal trait that I think it's very easy for us to forget. But I think that's something that, like, when you're up against the wall and it's you and another parent who's looking to protect their child, you find common ground very easily that way. So it's, that with all the amazing kind of blockbuster kaiju action that Jonathan Lau is capable of delivering, he has really made the Herculoids his own in a way that fits what we've done in the Space Ghost universe. But these characters are super cool. I was really impressed with the way he did Xandor and Tara. We don't have a lot of women in the book because there's not a lot of women characters in Space Ghost. I've injected all of the female villains that I can. That's the cool thing about the Herculoids.
Right.
It's a husband and a wife. And it was fun kind of flexing those muscles. I haven't really gotten a chance to do a lot with romance since Cable, Love, and Chrome. But seeing the way that Jonathan did it, there's a scene in that first issue where you see Tara and Xandor for the first time, and you're like, oh, those two are super into each other. Like you can kind of feel the heat just from the inks. I didn't know Jonathan had it in him, frankly. And so that's a really cool kind of dynamic to kind of like include into the mix, because I think ultimately Tara's the X factor. She's the thing that has saved Xandor from becoming a Space Ghost. She saved his life, and she saves his life every single day.
That's awesome.
So what I'm hearing is that Space Ghost beats the Herculoids, considers if he needs to be a father, and then season 3 he gets a talk show.
Then he gets a talk show. Maybe if I get to issue 51, that'll be the talk show issue. That's about it. There have been the non-sexy answer is that Coast to Coast is technically considered a different license. So we've had to really pick and choose our battles. And our licensors at Warner Brothers have been amazing. They have given me so much latitude. They've let us do stuff that they've even kind of let us bend the rules a little bit on occasion. They've let us do a few things. You'll see there's something coming in Space Ghost Volume 3 that is technically not part of our life. At Warner Brothers, I basically made the pitch to them and begged them and said, this would really this would be a huge value add to us. And the amazing team at Warner Brothers, especially Megan Logan over there, who's my hero, she really went to bat for us, and they let us do it. So we've got some real fun stuff coming, both in this crossover event and then leading into Space Ghost Volume 3. That'll begin, I believe that'll be early 27.
Awesome.
Are you surprised that, because to be honest, when I first heard, you were writing a Space Ghost, my first thought was, okay, 6 issues and we're done. just because it's that type of character, Well, but it seems that there's a following out there.
Yeah, this thing has legs.
The youth cry out for Space Ghost. No, it's one of those things that, when Dynamite first approached me, they offered me a very generous runway. And that was one of the big things that drew me to it originally. Was I had the longest run I had prior to that was 10 issues on Savage Avengers. And that was something that I would have loved to have done a third arc on that. I'm really proud of how that book came together, but it doesn't change the fact that we found out that we had to write out Conan still fairly early on, but the fact that we had to write them out and then sort of kind of like dance around that for the second arc, and then by the time people kind of understood what we were doing and what the vision was, it was too late for us to do a third arc. Sort of we had already kind of crossed that sales threshold. And so when Dynamite said we can offer you 13, I felt like, oh, I can kind of make a meal out of this. And unlike Savage Avengers, where we kind of did 2 long arcs for that, I thought about what Ryan North was doing in Fantastic Four. I thought about what Jed MacKay was doing on Moon Knight. I thought what Steve Orlando was doing on Scarlet Witch. This done-in-one approach. Nobody ever really tried to explain why it worked, but you could tell it was working. And I started thinking, here's why it works, is because people respond to endings. They know that every time you finish an adventure with these characters, you feel that much more emotionally involved, that much more emotionally invested. And so I thought, well, if I can do a bunch of stories that are done in ones and done in twos, that means that by the end of a 1-year run, that means we've told, like 10 stories. And that means that we've basically, the readers that are used to reading 5-issue arcs, that means that we've essentially given them, 5 years worth of story in one. And so it was really rolling the dice on that to see if my theory was correct. And I think it played out. In that, every time we had another adventure with Space Ghost and Company, and we were able to sort of move the pieces a little bit in terms of their relationships with one another, people got really invested. And conversely, it also made it very easy for people to jump on board, that they could say, oh, like I missed an issue. Doesn't matter, pick up the next one. Like we'll take you when we take you. And so I agree with you though, Chad. Like I didn't mean to laugh at your thing earlier, but I certainly didn't expect for it to take off the way that it did whatsoever. I think we were certainly playing with things that we hoped worked, but certainly had no idea if it was going to. That book certainly is and remains, I think, one of the bigger surprises of my career. But yeah, I think it, seeing how many people continue to support us, I think Dynamite and Warner Brothers, they both really understand the roadmap of where we're going with it. I think internally, both parties really like it, which doesn't hurt. And I love writing this book. I love these characters, and I love the freedom that I get. Like, I love writing for Marvel. I want to make that extremely clear. I've had so much fun playing with some of the biggest characters in pop culture. However, one of the handicaps of working in a shared universe is that there is kind of this horse trading in terms of the characters, particularly the villains. And that is sort of an extra skill set. When you're writing for Marvel and DC, you are basically, like you have to be like a long distance marathon runner while having your while doing it with weights, it is part of the sport. But as a result, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes, it burns resources that you need to make the books themselves. I don't have to worry about any of that with Space Ghost. I get to have all the fun of writing a superhero, but if I want to use Zorak, I just use Zorak. I don't have to ask anybody's permission to do it. So, and I think that's really kind of helped in that, Warner Brothers and Dynamite, because there's no other books that they necessarily have to think about in terms of what my plans are. It's given me a lot of freedom. It's streamlined the process, and I think that's allowed me to continue to deliver the work of the consistency that we have, while being able to juggle multiple projects like this Speed Racer, and the OZ, and other stuff I can't even talk about yet. So yeah, this book is really special to me, and I right now we're still kind of firming up what the exact runway is going to be post this event. I believe that Jonathan and I are committed to at least 44 issues on the book. However, I would really like to do 50. At that point we're already there. And I already know the finale arc. The finale arc of the series is already So it's just a matter of sort of figuring out the runway up to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I write your congressman. Tell him you want 50 Pepose and Lao. That'll keep my puppy fed and kibble and my daughter wrapped in diapers. So
Oh yeah.
big help.
And that puppy is a 10-ton terrier, so
Yes,
you got to keep it fed.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, no, you're doing fantastic work on Space Ghost and Speed Racer, which we didn't have time to get to. But
well, definitely check out our Demon on Wheels storyline kicks off next week, I believe. Yeah, Speed gets accidentally dosed with a compound called V-gas. It's a performance enhancer that decreases your fear and increases your aggressiveness. So yeah, we're gonna see Speed fully unleashed, and his supporting cast is gonna have to try to bring him back from the brink. So really fun issue, kind of inspired by Grant Morrison's first issue on Batman, where he's fighting the Ninja Man Bats at the art museum. You'll see I spent like 2 hours on Google Translate coming up with the world's dumbest Magritte joke. So you'll get to see that in this upcoming issue. So yes, I'm very excited for people.
Awesome. Well, David Pepose, we're so glad to have had you back for the show this week.
Thank you so much for having me.
Get out there. What is the date that the newest OZ campaign starts?
It kicks off exactly 1 week from today, Monday, June 8th. So definitely sign up for the pre-launch page right now. It's at tinyurl.com/theOZcomic. And yeah, we're gonna have early bird discounts in our first 48 hours. So backing us early is always a big help. It helps bump us up and Kickstarter's algorithm. But yeah, if you sign up for the pre-launch page now, you will be notified when it goes live first thing next Monday morning. And yeah, we would love to have you. This book, if you missed our first 2 campaigns, it's very easy to catch up in either print or digital. But we would love to have you join us as a Yellow Brick Road warrior.
Awesome. Can't wait to support it.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll be following the campaign on our weekly crowdfunding roundup. So
yeah,
thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Yeah. And then, of course, get out there, folks, and support Space Ghost and Speed Racer as well, and whatever other wonderful books David has coming down the pike that he can't talk about yet.
Stay tuned. Lots of fun stuff coming in 27.
Sweet.
Really quick. Is the kid going to throw not a wrench, but is it going to change your con schedule for the end of the year?
Not for the end of the year, but for the middle of the year. I will not be at San Diego Comic-Con this year on account of my daughter being born, currently scheduled for the first day of the show. So I will be hosting my own small, intimate convention in my local hospital delivery room that weekend. But yes, I will be. I believe, I'm scheduled to be in there for New York Comic Con in October, so I'll be there. We're still kind of sussing out the rest of the shows for this year. It's very TBD about Los Angeles and Long Beach Comic Cons. We're going to see. It all depends on if this baby takes after my wife or if she takes after me. If she takes after me, you're not going to be seeing me for a while. Hopefully, I have a calm baby that takes after my wife.
Awesome. Well, my friend, congratulations on everything you've got going on right now.
I appreciate it. As you can see, I'm literally recording this in my daughter's nursery right now, so it's good times for everybody at Casa de Pepose. So thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you to everyone watching and listening. Thank you for everyone who supported my work. I really hope that you will join us for the OZ's Kickstarter, our third and final. This book is, I think, some of my best work, and I hope you'll join us for the ride.
Awesome. Well, okay. We'll be back on Thursday, Chad and I, this week. Chad, who are we talking to in just a mere 3 days?
Joe Carollo is going to be joining the show, and he's going to be talking about his upcoming book through Bad Cave about Rachel Roche. I don't know how you say it. So he can tell me how to say it, but she's a female creator. So
awesome. All right. Well, folks, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting us both here on the show and at comic-watch.com, where you can find us every day with your latest fandom news and pro reviews from our all-volunteer staff of writers. Hit us up if you're interested in joining our team. Until next time, get out there and do good in the world, because God knows we need it. Thank you, and until next time, we are the Comic Watchers, and this is our show.